Alright, let us go over some of the cards that I've been looking at from the newest set Aetherdrift that is going to come out soon. I was actually waiting for 10 different cards to show up during the spoilers, but it hasn't really been happening after waiting for a few days. I will make a separate video if new cards show up that has potential. So yeah, let's look at some new cards, because some of these cards are kind of crazy. So starting off, we have Ketramose. I can't really believe that we're actually getting this card. There were so many people that were pinging me in Discord when they saw the spoiler. And obviously this is a pretty scary card that is apparently going to be legal in Timeless, but it'll be banned in Historic, and it'll also be legal as a one-of in Historic Brawl. This has been already confirmed by the WotC staff, saying that it'll be legal in Timeless and not restricted in Timeless. So you can expect 3 or 4 copies of these in some decks that want fast mana. And this is also double confirmed on their Magic the Gathering official website that you can actually craft these using wild cards as well. So it is definitely coming, and the implications of this card existing in Timeless is basically combo decks become even better, right? As there are no interaction spells to punish all these all-in combo decks in Timeless at the moment. The fun part is this will also spawn new decks, such as prison decks, for example, like they want to run out some prison cards a little bit earlier, or even storm decks using things like Besiege the Mirror, because this is an artifact and it also ramps you early, right? So it is a very powerful card, and I'm a little scared because it could potentially warp the format by giving these like combo decks a little bit too much advantage. But yeah, like I said, right now we don't have like turn 0 answers to these type of decks. It would be really nice to get Force of Negation potentially in this special guest as well, which would kind of balance things out, but we'll have to see how that pans out over the week here. So next up, we have this card called The Last Ride. This card is basically a Death Shadow with a twist. It is a vehicle, which is kind of funny. The fun part here is that even if you play this out on turn 1, it doesn't get destroyed because it's an artifact until you crew it to become a creature. But the cool part here is that this is self-sustaining because you can pay 3 mana to draw a card and pay 2 life at the same time, which is pretty nice because you can kind of control how fast you want to go down to being able to activate Death Shadow, or you can kind of take it slow and play a little bit more control-y style, right? You can hold up counter spells, hold up Bowmasters, or draw with this card. So this does actually give you a lot of options, which is kind of cool. And the fact that this has crew 2 means that a singular Bowmaster does crew this card. So the crew cost isn't too big of a deal either, because you're also going to be playing this in Loris deck, right? So Loris can also grab the Bowmaster back, or you can just crew using the Loris as well. So I think this card is pretty sweet. But the thing is, Death Shadow decks currently aren't that great. It's playable, but it's not that great, because a lot of decks are playing Swords of Plowshare. And the reason why the Swords of Plowshare is being played a lot is because even blue-black decks are splashing white sometimes, because it does give them access to Deafening Silence in the sideboard, which is great versus Show and Tell and Belcher decks. So a lot more decks are playing white for the sake of being able to counter combo decks at the moment, which is leading to a little bit more Swords of Plowshare. Otherwise, it would just be energy deck that's playing it, or, you know, some blue-white X control decks that's very unpopular. That's what's going on at the moment in Timeless formats, which is a bit unfortunate, and I don't think this card will see play in Historic because it's already pretty hard to activate that Shadow in Historic because there's no fetch lands. And at the same time, there's no good 2-mana counterspell in that format. So you can't really play this control-y style draw-go strategy with this card, which is probably what the card was designed for. And next up is Loot the Pathfinder. This might be a little bit slow, but it has some pretty unique interaction with another card. But as a base, it's a very expensive card. You're probably not going to be able to hardcast this in most of your games. And it's also using a keyword that's new. The exhaust keyword basically means that you can only activate once per this permanent. So for example, if this card got blinked or, you know, got destroyed and then reanimated, for instance, you can do it again. But just for 1 mana, you get a Dark Ritual if you have green mana. And then you have draw 3 by paying 1 blue. This is basically Ancestral Recall, which is kind of insane. Or if you have red mana, this is basically Lightning Bolt. So how do we abuse this? The effect is actually pretty powerful, and the way you abuse this is with this card called Agatha's Soul Cauldron. And that can also kind of let you pseudo bypass the exhaust keyword as well, because this is per permanent, so you can also just put counters on each of the permanents that you control, right? If you have 2 creatures activated multiple times. So since it's a pretty expensive card, you do probably want to run this in like a looting deck or somehow mill this card, because the payoff with the Soul Cauldron is actually pretty nice. But it is also a mythic though, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be crafting something like this first, because my mythic wild cards are literally in the dumpster at the moment. And moving on to the next card, we have this card called the Aetherspark. This one is bit of a wild one. So as you can see, it's typing, it has Planeswalker, Artifact, Equipment, which is just crazy to me, because this has never happened before, right? This is a completely new thing. So immediately, you can already expect this card with another card called Stoneforge Mystic, because Stoneforge Mystic tutors for an equipment. But because this is a Planeswalker, it's really cool that Stoneforge Mystic can now tutor for a Planeswalker. And what's funny is that last time I played with Stoneforge Mystic, I jokingly said about how it'd be interesting to see like some different equipments with other types, like even such as like MDFC lands. Like just imagine like MDFC land with an equipment type. That would be kind of crazy, right? But now we're seeing a Planeswalker. So this is an equipment that actually doesn't have an equipment cost, which makes sense because it is a Planeswalker. You can just equip to another creature using its +1 ability. And while doing that, it also gives you +1/+1 counter, which is honestly pretty nice. And once you actually equip it to a creature, as you can expect from an equipment, it attaches to that creature, which means you're not going to be able to attack the Planeswalker as long as this card is attached to another creature. So it is a card that's pretty hard to deal with, because it's kind of like a parasite assimilating to a creature, and you can't even pack this Planeswalker unless you get rid of that creature first. And also, once you run out of cards, you can also -5 to draw 2 cards as well. It is on the expensive side, like -5 just to draw 2 cards. And honestly, the ultimate is definitely not appealing either, because it's -10 to add 10 mana of any color. Like, what is this even for? Honestly, they completely missed the mark on the ultimate with this one, considering that this is supposed to be quote-unquote the grand prize for winning a race in this plane. The ultimate really should have just said win the game, and that would be so flavorful. So honestly speaking, I think this card, you just play it for the first 2 ability, the +1 and the -5. +1 most of the times, and then draw 2, -5 sometimes. But I'm not really sure if this is the first equipment you actually go for, because the +1/+1 is something that gets stronger over time. I'm not sure if you want that. I think like, you might want something that's beefy like at the get-go. So with Stoneforge Mystic, I think you still always go for a Dissection Tool, in my opinion. Now, let's talk about this card called Marauding Mako, because this card is crazy. So this card gets +1/+1 counter every time you discard a card, which is absolutely insane. And that's really it. It's pretty simple, right? It's a simple card, 1 mana 1/1, but every time you discard, this card grows, which makes it perfect for a Hollow One deck. So you pair it up with things like Fear of Missing Out, Faithless Looting, or even Inti. You're gonna be like stacking counters so fast. Plus, you know, with the cycling cards like Troll of Khazad-dûm and Oliphant, it does add some flexibility, right? Like for example, you're playing against a Bowmaster deck. You know that opponent's gonna have Bowmaster, and it's ready to ping your guy. And all of a sudden, you, in response, cycle the Troll of Khazad-dûm or Oliphant, discarding those cards, and then, you know, they just flashed in an Orcish Bowmaster for no reason, you know? Things like that. So honestly, like, absolutely insane card. It doesn't even say, like, only during your turn. It can be on opponent's turn as well, so which makes it even better. And what I especially like about this card is it even has cycling for 2. It just has everything, and it's so simple. And next up, we have this card called Ketramose, the New Dawn. This is also a very interesting card. I'm not really sure if this card is going to be playable in Historic, but in Timeless, it might see some play. So this is a legendary creature with Menace, Lifelink, and Indestructible with 4/4 stats for only 3 mana, which is kind of insane, but it does have some downsides, right? And that is, you can't attack or block with it unless there are 7 or more cards in the exile, which is honestly pretty hard to do unless you play this card with something like Rest in Peace, which is kind of weird. So why is this good? Well, every time whenever one or more cards are put into exile from the graveyard and or battlefield during your turn, by the way, it says your turn. I will probably forget this the first time I play this because it says your turn, and yeah, I will definitely be misplaying with this card because of this text. And whenever this happens, whenever cards are put into exile from graveyard or battlefield during your turn, you draw a card and lose 1 life. So like I said, you can pair this up with Rest in Peace, which makes it kind of insane because every fetch land now becomes draw 1 card, lose 1 life. So Rest in Peace is going to activate this card pretty fast, but even without it, if you pair this card up with something like a Solitude, you're evoking, which means you're putting 1 card in the exile, which isn't actually going to trigger the draw effect, by the way, because it says from the graveyard or the battlefield. So card exiling from your hand doesn't actually trigger it, but what triggers is the Solitude exiling a creature that's on the battlefield, which will give you a card. So you can expect up the Beanstalk when you pair it up with Solitude, which is pretty nice. And the other cards that actually work really well with this card are the Delve spells. So that is a pretty nice way of actually getting this card online as soon as possible. Which brings me to my next point. There's actually a sneaky card that actually has fantastic synergy with the Ketramose, which is actually Soul Flare. This has Delve, so you're going to exile a lot, but because of the keywords, Menace, Lifelink, and Indestructible, these are all great keywords that the deck wants, and it's also on color. So there's some interesting things you can do with this card. So I'm pretty excited about building a deck with this because there's a lot of things you can do. Next up is unfortunately this card called Transit Mage. I hope this card isn't good as I think it is because this is such an ugly card. I really do not want this card in my deck, but jokes aside, this can tutor for a key piece in Goblin Charbelcher or the One Ring in a mono blue Belcher deck, which is actually pretty nice. Plus, if you already got Belchers or One Ring in your hand, you can also pitch this card to Chrome Mox, which is also a card that is going to see in mono blue Belcher. And you can even run this card out on turn 2 with Chrome Mox as well, while also holding up a counter spell such as Flare of Denial, since this is a blue card, which are all nice things, right? But my only gripe at the moment with this card, other than the art itself, is that if you already have One Ring or the Belcher in hand, this card is kind of dead compared to something like our 2-mana cards that can look at the top 4 or 5 to look for lands, for example. So if you're putting this card, I'm not sure if you're actually going to be playing it more than like 1 or 2. It would be kind of a hard fit because you're going to be replacing the creatures already in the deck, which are already really good. And like I said, it does have downsides, right? It does have downsides. And it also doesn't pair up well with the Kraken combo as well. If you bounce this card, it doesn't do anything. But if you bounce the 2-mana cards, you can still look for pieces, right? You can infinitely look for pieces and go through your entire deck until you can find a mana drain plus a 4-mana card so that you can have free 4 mana, play the Belcher out, and then kill your opponent on that same turn. But this card can't do that. So it's a pretty nice card, but it does have downsides to it. And finally and lastly, we got this card called Demonic Junker. This is a bit of a niche card because, Affinity isn't particularly good in Timeless, but it's a solid addition to the Blue-Black Affinity, which is a deck compared to Blue-White Affinity. It does let you play Thoughtseize in a combo-centric format, so it does have some advantages, but the card that was lacking in the Blue-Black Affinity was it didn't have removal spell, and basically this one solves that. when this card enters, it does have affinity for artifacts, otherwise it would be unplayable. When it enters the battlefield, you can destroy up to 1 creature each player controls. So even though it says each, you don't technically have to destroy one of your own because it says up to 1. And again, blue-black affinity, the reason why you want to play blue-black is you get access to discard spells. Plus, you also have the artifact lands on color, blue and black, in the format, but currently don't have white affinity land. So love seeing more cards like these because it does boost the blue-black affinity a little bit more. So honestly, it's not the most powerful card, but it does add some interaction and flexibility to the deck, so pretty nice. So amongst these cards, I think my favorites are Ketramose, Marauding Mako, and the Demonic Junker. And Ketramose mainly for deck building potential. Like, I'm not really sure if this card is going to be good, but I think it's going to be a pretty good time building new decks with this card. And obviously, Marauding Mako, I'm a pretty big fan of Hollow One, and this is obviously going to be a great addition to the deck. You can expect some insane openings from Hollow One now, so we know that for sure. And the Demonic Junker, I am also a pretty big fan of Affinity. I'm not sure if this is going to be a game changer, but it does add an artifact-based removal option to the Affinity, which it did lack before, so a little bit curious about that. And as for Chrome Mox, it's not my favorite because I'm a little worried about its impact. I think it might give the degenerate combo decks a little bit too much of an edge without any answers. Like, we don't have any turn 0 answers to these decks. It could potentially create an imbalance in the format between the archetypes, giving combo too much of an edge, right? So yeah, that is an early look at the Aetherdrift spoiler that I think are going to have some potential. So let me know if I actually missed something in the comments below. So with that said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye-bye.